Good afternoon, everyone, and sorry to all of you guys who have been waiting out here in the audience because we thought we were presenting to you and apparently we didn't click start talk. So big oopsie on our part, but we're so glad to hear you have you guys here with us today. Welcome to this month's webinar, ServiceNow Beyond the Platform, focusing on people and process. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into how you can optimize the value of ServiceNow within your organization by aligning your business processes to drive a transformative culture and boost your employee and customer experience. First, I want to thank all of you for being here and apologize again for being late. We will make this an on-demand recording, so even if you have to hop out early, we'll send it to you after the fact. I'm your moderator, Cassandra Sobotka, and I am a marketing associate here at Acorio. It's my sincere pleasure to introduce today's fantastic panel. First, we have Michael Beldi, VP of Advisory. Michael is a transformation executive and creative problem solver who has helped organizations transform their businesses to drive profitability and improve human experience for over 20 years. He brings extensive expertise in business growth, enterprise strategy planning, operational effectiveness, and leadership development to the Acorio team. Next, we have Stacy Prezell, VP of Employee Transformation and Strategy. With more than 10 years of experience in Fortune 500 enterprises and 7 years in ServiceNow, Stacy has directed process management programs and led complex global multi-million-dollar technology projects for organizations transforming their HR and IT service delivery. Last but not least, we have Grant Pulver, VP of Client Success. Grant has been in the technology business for over 25 years, specializing in ITSM, CSM, GBS, and customer experience. And he's remained laser focused on the value of these programs to the bottom line of the business and to the productivity of their customers. And if you're new here, you might be wondering who we are and why we are here to talk with you today. Acorio is the largest exclusively focused consultancy in the ServiceNow ecosystem, a global leader in product line workflows and total certifications. And we were recently named one of the best US consultancies by SPI. But if you really want to get to know us, there is one simple string that brings us all together. And it's the reason that Michael, Stacy, Grant, and I are all here today. We're passionate about our clients and the work that they're doing, and we consider it our mission to empower them to drive real outcomes throughout their entire ServiceNow journey. So needless to say, we are very excited to be with you here today and to go beyond the platform and into people and process. Next, I'll hand it off to Grant so he can walk us through our agenda for today's session.
Thanks, guys. So as Kaz said, we want to talk a little bit beyond the platform. We want to talk a little bit about user impact and how organizations are aligning and then value. So with that said, we're going to talk about current trends in ServiceNow, and Kaz is going to walk through a little bit and I'll help with what we found in the Insight and Vision report that goes out to executives in the ecosystem and kind of what they're thinking about over the next couple of years and where their thought processes are lying. We're going to talk a little bit about GBS and shared services and kind of the drivers that are there for making those organizational changes. We'll talk a little bit about aligning culture and how to get your teams on board and understanding the value of it. And then Michael will close us out with value optimization and outcomes, really talking about how to recognize the value of making those changes in your organization from both your shareholders and your business standpoint. So with that said, Kaz, do you want to dig into the Insight and Value report?
Yeah, for sure. So before we hop into that, I just want to reiterate, we're going to make this an on-demand session, so that will be available after the fact. And then I also wanted to share a few quick tactics. The session today is designed to be a conversation between our team and all of you guys out in the audience. So always feel free to use that Q&A feature, and we'll be answering your questions either in real time or at the end of the session. Even if you just want to clarify something or you have something to add, feel free to type it into that Bright Talk question window. Now we can dive back into our data. So this was our third annual ServiceNow Insight and Vision report. And in terms of demographics, we got almost 500 participants who responded, with 68% of them coming from large enterprise companies with more than 5,000 employees. And the report itself revealed a rising executive focus on the importance of having a robust digital business strategy, but it also highlighted the struggles that organizations have been having actually putting those strategies into place and aligning the rest of their business to ensure that those strategies are successful. We obviously recognize that the past 18 months have massively reshaped the way that ServiceNow customers think not only about the platform, but also about digital transformation in general. So companies were forced to rethink what services they were providing and then either improve or even change how those services are delivered to their employees and end customers. And then here we have some data that was pulled directly from our report. As you can see, there is a renewed or a rising focus on elevating ESAT and CSAT, and we also saw how quickly organizations needed to develop and adapt a return to work plan. And all of these things, all of these changes that have been happening are really forcing companies to think critically, not just about the technology that they use, but also about their people and processes. Grant, what have you been seeing?
I think the vision report really kind of drew out what we're hearing from our customers. And it doesn't show 3 years ago on here, but the digital transformation words and AI and that were super important 3 years ago. And then they became part of everybody's everyday business. And it went down a little bit 2 years ago. But then we entered into 2020 and solar winds, and then obviously the pandemic, and in those areas that companies were ill prepared for, that digital transformation or the digital age and AI learning would help enable their customers to recover quickly to these things. So we're seeing renewed interest in that. Not that the interest was gone, but a really more of a laser focus on it to start enabling with knowledge management and automated repairs and automated setups to be able to do that. And I think with the way this is set up with the customer sat and the employee satisfaction behind it, I think those are totally parallel movements. And it's those satisfaction scores that are driving those transformations. And if you look and go right to left, it's really everything is driving and stepping on the next step to move through those. So I think that's an amazing step that we're starting to look at, is not only are companies acknowledging that the digital transformation, but they're starting to put it in their plans and starting to physically put money towards it instead of just trying to manage it out of their normal operational run states. So let's talk for a few minutes about GBS and where companies are with that. So 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when we were talking about shared services and global business services and what organizations are in there, a lot of it was around financial reasons to do that. So having a single level one, having a common user experience as people are calling in for shared services support. But I think the pandemic really caught us off guard and taught us some lessons that we were able to use to find the value of these GBS organizations. And as you walk through and start to look at it, it's not necessarily about the cost. The cost takes care of itself in the end. It's around your customer experience and your employee experience and their ability to be agile in their movements. So
Grant, I think,
go ahead. Sorry, Stacy.
Sure. I think too, one of the things that we saw from some of the projects that we were working on during that time frame as well was, you mentioned the focus on agility, but also on simplifying processes in order to stand them up quickly. So, especially as people were transitioning to working from home, those shared services teams really kind of received the brunt of that impact in supporting all of those workers. So making sure that they had standardized processes, kind of simplifying them down to the bare bones so that they could get that employee experience out there to their employees, making sure that they had the equipment that they need, making sure that they had access to the things that they need, making sure that they had the ability to reach out to those teams as quickly as they could, was very critical during that time.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And it was interesting and very rewarding from a strategic standpoint to help with this organizational shift. But those shared services organizations are commonly in the office and commonly on the phones 90% of the time. And what was interesting is they were adjusting how they work as well as trying to support their customers on the way they work. So they were kind of hit from both sides from a challenge standpoint. So defining your GBS strategy, there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about in here that I'm hearing come up more and more with our executives that we're talking about. And it's really around looking from the bottom up and focusing on your customer and employee experience. And what people are starting to realize, if you have a streamlined approach and a single point of entry for your customers, it turns into financial gain in the end. Instead of focusing on the financial piece up front, they're starting to look at it from an employee experience and also starting to measure things like ESAT and customer sat and customer renewals based on that, and starting to get different ways and more creative ways to finance some of these initiatives other than just the good old ROI and cost savings. And I think it's really important as we're doing this is we prioritize the productivity of our customers and making sure that they're up and running and making sure that they're available to do what they need to do. And it goes from internal customers and external customers. Everybody that's interacting with you from a GBS standpoint has another job that they're trying to get done. And they're starting to feel the stress to move through. So anything that we can do to make them more productive and make them more effective at their job is super important to be able to get through this. And I feel like starting to look at things outside of the typical operational metrics is really important to help define how you're working and how you're getting the value there. And Mike will talk a little bit more about that later.
Hey, Grant, I love this because when I think of GBS, I typically think first and foremost of cost savings as well. But what I'm hearing here is that really there's this evolution of what shared services should be. And we're actually seeing that a lot on the market where customers are mapping out the employee journey of a shared services model and trying to tie that back to ESAT and CSAT, which typically you didn't see done. I'd say in years past, you didn't see it as frequently. And oftentimes there was confusion about how the new shared service would fit into the culture of the organization or the operational day-to-day of the organization. So I think it's a really subtle but powerful point.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting, Mike, is organizations used to put 2 or 3 groups into a group called shared services, right? And what we're starting to recognize is the efficiencies that are gained there and the employee and customer experience that's gained there. And more groups we're figuring out. I'm even seeing IT move into an organizational structure that's included in GBS and shared service. And if they're not in there, there's certainly a much higher level of partnership between IT and HR and finance and legal assistance.
Great.
So if you have any questions, feel free to put them out there. But let's talk a little bit about the culture.
Yeah, for sure. So a huge part, obviously, of making sure your GBS strategy is successful is aligning your culture to support that. Stacy, you're obviously the closest to this. So what have you been seeing out in the field?
Yeah, thanks, Cassandra. Culture is definitely a critical component, especially nowadays with those rapidly shifting demographics that we're seeing in the workforce, as well as that war for talent that we're hearing is already underway. Companies focus on things like net promoter scores and employee satisfaction scores and customer satisfaction scores is very important. And an organization's culture can really attract and also retain those top employees. So it's very critical. But for those companies that are undergoing that digital transformation, those metrics are just one piece of a larger puzzle. COVID showed us, like we talked about, the need for organizations to embrace change, to be more agile and flexible, and also the need to be less siloed and more cross-functional, getting all of those teams to work together in concert to deliver those great experiences for customers and employees. And recent studies have showed us that this is really challenging. Transformations are very difficult for organizations. Only 30% of them really succeed because of the focus on ensuring cultural buy-in from employees. That's where the shortfall usually we hear from our customers happens. So while metrics are helpful, creating that environment where employees feel valued is really key. And in turn, they're going to instinctively do what's best for your customers and for your organization.
I think, Stacy, one thing that I've seen is Middle management really struggles with this, right? Because we have a group of operational reports and we'll have average speed to answer will be at 29 seconds and we have a big party about it. But then when it's at 31 seconds, the hammer comes down and we push answer the phone faster. And then all of a sudden your resolution rate, your customer set starts to get affected by it. I think one thing I'm seeing with companies that's really been a positive motion is we're really promoting employees to just do the right thing. And people will do that. And we start harping on a single metric or we start looking at a single point of interaction, and that's where things start to get out of skew. It's really hard to understand, both from an executive level to communicate when we communicate down, but also from an understanding and drive standpoint from middle management, is we've got to look at the whole picture and how things ebb and flow and how things affect each other. Again, I go back to customers don't care if you answer in 29 seconds when your SLA is 30 or if you're at 31. What they care is you're doing the right thing for them to make them productive. And you start communicating in that in your organization, and your employees will start to buy in. And at the end of the day, the old adage of happy customers equal happy employees and happy employees equal happy customers is absolutely true.
Hey, can I pile onto that? So I think it's a great point. I think culture oftentimes gets confused with things like process and things like governance. Culture is not. I think culture is much more fuzzy than that. I think first and foremost, it's about psychological safety. I think it's about trust. I think it's about empathy, and those are things that are difficult. I mean, particularly in technology-centric functions, they're difficult to write down. They're difficult to document. They're difficult to clarify. And I think it's worth having those right brain discussions about the emotional stimuli and the emotional things that matter to individuals, and not just the left brain, very rational technical components of an organization. So it's something that I think, particularly as organizations are going through transformations, it oftentimes is a byproduct, and it's not thought about in its own entity, as its own entity.
And that's a great point, Mike. And I think, Kaz, moving on to the next, one thing that's really critical, in addition to the things that you all talked about, is having that clear strategy and vision that's aligned to the business goals. But the executives and leaders must tell a story and really connect that reason for why this massive change is happening and helping their employees understand it and embrace it. They need to be able to tell what those new ways of working mean to those employees and what business outcomes they're going to be achieved and how they can help. The best leadership can do is make sure that they're doing open and transparent communication with all levels of employees and making sure that they're stating that case from those different perspectives. It's going to look one way to a certain employee, a different way to a manager, and a completely different way to a leader. So making sure that they're communicating those different personas and how those things, those impacts are going to what they're going to mean to them is really important. And using different forums to help getting that messaging across. There's been studies out there that say in-person scenarios are great, but really a lot of organizations are becoming really successful using remote options thanks to COVID, and using alternatives like all hands meetings and town halls to communicate this story.
I think just to add to that, Stacy, is we often talk about the WIFM, right? The what's in it for me, and being able to communicate as you're starting to drive an initiative, you're starting to look at an operational change or a shift. I think it's important that we look at the personas of the people that it's affecting, and we start to put it in a format that there's an understanding of why it's better for them. So it's making their life easier. It's making their customers' workflow easier so that they can be happier as they're talking to them and they're not constantly getting beat up by their customers that are upset. And I often use, my kids always know when I'm upset or having a bad experience because I'm yelling into the phone the word operator or representative. And I think it's important that we talk about making these changes and why we're doing it, but also what's in it for the employees and what's in it for the customers.
Well, and to your earlier point, Grant, too, talking about the employee experience, defining these personas is critical, because that's going to help us tailor those experiences for these different audiences. And so we can reuse a lot of this communication and derive that as part of our experience as we're building it out.
I do think it's almost like a game of telephone, is that when an organization CEO announces a large digital transformation, and then that message gets passed down from level to level to level, and at the end of the day, the person holding the ball at the end has to install software. How much of the original message and the intent of the message as it was crafted as a corporate level strategic initiative, how much of that gets lost, and how do we do better to not lose that by communicating the intent, and to your point, Stacy, tailoring the message so that each level, it means something different for that level, and how is it communicated so that there's not just buy-in, but it's changing people's behaviors, thoughts, actions, etc.
Absolutely. And, we're going through our own transformation here at Acorio, having become an NTT company. And, this is really important to our culture, is making sure that there's open communication and a lot of transparency. One thing that our leaders do on a regular basis is hold what they call open mic forums, where they're sharing information as it's coming down from them real time, which may in turn be things like, I don't know, or we're working on that. And, putting out that action item to the employees that they're going to find out more information and get back to us. So keeping those lines of communication open is really key to making sure your employees stay engaged and are really buying into this transformation. And on top of that, one thing that's really important as well is to include your employees in solutioning. When you go through these transformations, we know that there's technology involved, but like Michael mentioned, there are lots of other things that are happening alongside of it, such as organizational changes, role changes for your employees, as well as updating different processes that are going to be supporting that transformation. So one of the things that we like to tell our teams is to prioritize that psychological safety. Think about your employees and put yourself in their shoes and understand the impacts of the ways of their working. A lot of companies who are successful with digital transformations have leaders who explicitly focus on empathy and connecting with their employees to help them understand what's changing, why it's important, and how it's going to affect them and their jobs. This not only is going to drive that support, but it's going to encourage those employees to share new ideas because they're going to feel safe to open their voices and share that information. So including those folks from different levels in workshops and process and product definition is going to establish that sense of ownership and help create those change agents within your organization who are going to promote adoption of the transformation. Companies are also looking at some different methods to help stimulate feedback and ideas using concepts like rapid prototyping and hackathons that will get people really involved and generating some new thoughts that, from the people that are in the trenches and know what the day-to-day is like. And then finally, the best way to make sure and drive this adoption is invest in your people to help drive that change. So create or update your reward and recognition programs that are going to foster those behaviors that you want to realize from the transformation. But also, you don't want to forget to create learning opportunities that are going to benefit some of your leaders as well. So programs focused on cross-functional facilitation or coaching and hiring, that's going to help your managers and your leaders prepare those teams for success.
One thing, Stacy, just to add to that I think is really important is understanding your influencers in your organization as you're moving through these. So it's really easy to put a management team together to drive some of these changes. But as Stacy said, there's influencers in your organization. So who are people calling when they have a question? Who are people complaining to? So if you recognize those influencers and get them involved, don't just use the positive people, right? Find some detractors and put them in this process. That'll help give them a sense of ownership and help drive through that culture change.
I'd even take it a step further, Grant. I love what you just said, but before making any changes either inside our client's company or inside of our own company for that matter, I like to build a slide during the presentation of the changes that occur, and I like to list at the very beginning all of the people that have taken a part into the planned transformation that's about to occur. Meaning, I think there's always a tendency to look at the messenger of the message and say, why are we doing that because of that person? When in fact, it's really an entire organization that's making a decision together, or at least have been informed or consulted about. I think it's important that people understand the gravity of the decisions that are made and the number of people that are involved in those decisions. I think it's a source of great comfort to know that decisions are not being made in a corner office, but they're being made by the masses, with consent. So that goes a long way to that psychological safety that you've listed here.
Cool. And I think we talked a little bit about value optimization.
Grant, can you hear me? You're a little bit fuzzy.
Sorry about that.
Okay, great. So the last topic we're going to cover today is value optimization and business outcomes. So said differently, how do companies define, realize, and prove success with regards to their investments, particularly in this case, ServiceNow. So more than ever, we at Acorio are seeing organizations are struggling to realize the full value of the platform, given license cost, resource hours invested, et cetera. As such, we've been advocating that companies take a few different measures to capture and prove value. So let's start from the beginning. So before a new ServiceNow investment is made, the CIO's organization will build out a business case to understand the cost benefit of expanding ServiceNow functionality as part of the digital transformations that we spoke about earlier. And those savings may include, reduction of technical debt, deduplication of software, and then hopefully, as ServiceNow is installed or expanded, the platform managers are able to realize those savings. That's cut and dry. The question I would ask, though, is that what else do your executives care about? And I think this is a theme now that we're hitting on a few times, right? What have executives communicated to the street? Is it corporate NPS? Is it driving employee experience? How your work ties into those corporate initiatives matter, right? If it's cost takeout that your firm is hoping to achieve, then what other kinds of savings can ServiceNow bring to your business? So have new digital workflows resulted in unexpected labor savings, or at least curb the need for additional hires? Are your teams more productive given the reduction in email traffic? Those types of examples, that's code for value. And both you and your organization should recognize them as value when considering future platform investments. So I think the big takeaway I want to reinforce here is to be both proactive and prescriptive upfront about the kind of value you seek to get out of the platform, not just in terms of operational metrics, which we'll talk more about, but in terms of overall business outcomes you are trying to achieve. Anyone have any comments about that?
No, I think it's good, and we'll get into the operational metrics, but I would also encourage people to be creative, right? There's customer renewal rates, there's net promoters, there's all those things that can go into this to help fund. And what I'm seeing a lot is some of those shared services organizations are actually starting to recognize the revenue that they bring to the companies. So as you're starting to better enable your employees to support your customers and there's a shared revenue value there that you can start to look at, as well as just your cost standpoint.
I think also, Grant, and I've heard this a few times where people will say, well, you know what? It's not my job to tie back to corporate level initiatives. My job is at the operational level. And I would challenge that. And yeah, it's not easy and it's not always intuitive, but I think, to be a culture that embraces, top-down strategic planning, I think everyone kind of owes it to give it more than just a college try to see how your work, even as an individual or even as a department, ties back to those corporate level initiatives. So I think the first step is really just articulate it, be proactive about it, and speak about it. Because if you don't even try, you're never going to get there.
Yeah, I go back to about empowering your employees to do the right thing, right? And no matter where you are in the organization, from top to bottom, your job is to make the company successful.
Yep, agree. All right, so let's move on. Another part of value optimization is around capturing value. So After all, how we capture value is an entirely different story from how we realize value. So, the first question I would ask is, do you or does your organization budget to have a value capture manager in place to help realize savings from an ongoing program or to prove that value is generated as initially discussed? So, said differently, what is it that we're really tracking as you go through a transformation or you're going through a large transformational change program? Are we just tracking to see that our programs are simply on time or on budget? Or are we tracking to see that we're extracting the value, in this case from ServiceNow, that we had planned up front? And those are, as you all know, very different things. So it's a different job. Oftentimes it's a different role, and that role needs to be budgeted for and planned for, because as Grant had mentioned earlier, there's all types of creativity in capturing that value and improving that value out. Now, of course, the topic of metrics and KPIs is obviously germane here as well. And the point I'd like to make is to make sure that we're measuring the right KPIs, but not measuring two KPIs at once. So, a few KPIs carefully selected that again tie back to business value, either as a leading indicator or a lagging indicator of value, can be far more effective than too many KPIs that could be even oftentimes contradictory. So, for example, improving speed to response, which then has a negative impact on your NPS because you're rushing your customers or your end users off the phone or off the line. So we have to find that balance. So, really important to, when you're looking at those operational metrics, is to pick those metrics carefully and make sure that you're tying back to the outcomes the best that you can.
I think just to add to that, Mike, one thing I would caution people, and I've failed in this way in the past and learned from it, is sometimes we drive that singular operational metric and it drives the wrong behavior. The example that you were talking about with the speed to answer, the speed to respond, is sometimes it's inevitable that if I'm harping on that response, I'm going to try to get off the phone and get to the next call, or try to access the next email, or try to acknowledge the next ticket while I'm skipping the last 2/3 of my last interaction and causing issues there. So just be careful on that focus. As you're laser focused on a single metric or a single operation, then it usually has a corollary effect, either in the positive or the negative, for something else in your organization that you have to keep your eye on.
So here's the question then, right? So where does that responsibility live? Is that the platform manager's responsibility? Is that the process manager's responsibility? Is that about value capture? Is that living in the world of OCM to make sure that we're not just being mechanical when we roll out these new applications or new functionality? Because I see part of the problem is that it can live in a number of different places, but nobody really owns it. And a lot of that is the soft, fuzzy culture piece that Stacy was talking about, is that it sort of kind of has to live everywhere, but in the absence of living everywhere, it doesn't live anywhere.
Yeah, I was laughing as you were saying that, because I was thinking I'll give the consultative answer of everybody owns it, right? But I think there's two main areas that you have to think through this. And one is, you usually have a person that's creating your reports or running your metrics or creating your dashboard. I know you're going to talk about that in a second. And I think the alignment in there is important so that you can see all those pictures at the same time as a middle manager managing your team. I also think there's a big component of this in OCM and training, is as you're doing your change management, there's a constant discussion on what those triggers are and what those failure points are and what those indicators are for that, so that you're starting to move through. And there's, as a customer service agent, I'll use that example, there's nothing worse than worrying about a single metric and not seeing the big picture. And that was what I was saying earlier around empower your employees to do the right thing and show them the value and what's in it for me, why they're doing it. And I think good things will happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. We did a workshop with a client, and it was about making data-driven decisions for organization's finance department. And we had both the middle management finance managers as well as the executives in the room. And there was a sort of aha moment when, the finance managers were pushing back and saying, that's not my job, is to provide insights. My job is to report on, what our systems are showing. And I looked over to the executives and said, executives, do you agree? And the executive said, no, we really want to empower our people to be insightful and to lean in and not just, do what's written on their job description. And I think it was sort of this eureka moment where, the team realized that they are empowered to make decisions or to drive insights or to think outside of the box and to really own that. And it sounds germane. It sounds maybe like a banal point, but people don't always realize that unless people come out and say it. So
yeah, I think it's always fun when you're sitting around the table and all of a sudden you can see light bulbs one by one going off.
Exactly.
In all of our heads.
Yeah. Thanks. Let's move on to the last topic under value optimization. So this is about dashboards and reporting. So, assuming that number one, we've clearly identified the business value that, the platform brings to the organization. And number two, we're using all means available to capture that value. The topic then becomes about how are we reporting on it? So on a base level, dashboards are obviously critical to demonstrate how ServiceNow is helping your org achieve its desired business outcomes. Used correctly, they can be a great tool both to manage up to your leadership as well as managing down to your team. Now, from my experience, dashboarding is a key component of what I would consider to be a much broader topic related to business storytelling. And heard Stacy mention this, and I was so happy. So, that's to say, how are we using data to demonstrate overall business effectiveness? And dashboarding and data is an important part of the story, but it's only one part of the story. And it's a part of the story that caters to people's left brains. They're very rational brains. They're very quantitative brains. But there's another part of the story, and that's matching that data with emotional stimuli. So when you review or present your data, whether up or down, I really encourage everyone to bring it to life with anecdotes, with success stories, with case studies. Call out the names of people in your organization or clients if it's customer-facing work, but individuals who have benefited from the operational gains and improvements that you've made. And then, furthermore, going back to the beginning of the discussion, we do tend to see a large focus on operational dashboards, but not those larger macro business goals. So in the absence of dashboards that are focusing on those, larger, higher level business outcomes, insofar as you can attempt to identify which of those operational metrics are leading and lagging indicators for those macro level goals, it goes a long way to telling a more comprehensive story about the value that you're getting from the platform, which, as we know, is so critical, not just for your own job productivity and, your own standing in the firm, but in the company, but then also, proving, why we should make more investments in ServiceNow, why you should continue to build upon the platform because of the value that it's generating. That's all I
Cool.
Good stuff. So we'll just wrap with some of the key takeaways that we want to talk about, and then we have a couple questions that we can answer. So center enabling for customers and employees. And one of the values of here is if your customers can answer questions or your employees can answer questions from multiple organizations, there's always a benefit. And bringing those groups together and using digital and AI as an enabler for that is really important. Then focus on inclusion. Stay open and honest with your employees. Get that sense of buy-in with your employees and let them have a vested interest in the success of it. And then obviously stay proactive and prescriptive in recognizing your value and communicate that value out. So as we talk through what Mike was talking about, it's really important that we don't lose that becomes just a metric. There's got to be a celebration of the success, as not just focusing on the negative aspects of it, but celebrate the successes of it and celebrate the impact that your teams are having on the business side. And again, I go back to, at the end of the day, happy customers equal happy employees, and happy employees equal happy customers. And it's usually never divided between those two. So if we want to open it up, Kaz, if you have any questions that the crowd put in.
Yeah, for sure. So it looks like we do have a couple questions and comments. One of them is about ITIL 4 and about promoting visibility. Grant, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is one of the points in my career that I was so excited is, IDO obviously has the word library in it, and it's been so scientific from day one. And the recognition that there's an emotional aspect around that and the collaboration and visibility is so important that the teams have has been an amazing step forward with the new version of IDO.
All right, awesome. Is there anything else we want to wrap up with? Also, feel free, even once this session switches into on demand, you can always use that question window and we'll have someone that will be available to respond and just reach out to you directly as well.
Yeah, I think just to add is, as we're consultants in practice, we're practitioners in our heart. And we're all very passionate about this. So if there's any further discussions or any further questions, we'd love to help.
Absolutely. All right, I think we will wrap it here then. Thank you everyone for joining us, and so sorry again for the little delay, but hopefully it gave you a little 7-minute break to grab some coffee or snack.
Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.